I'm going to start this off saying that most people that live in or around my apartment are on drugs or drink heavily. The police are here often, which has made me remember voices, faces and names of people who I don't talk to. Last night around 1 AM, I heard coughing right outside of my living room window. This was not concerning on its own because people pace and walk around here at night. My dog sometimes barks at people outside. I turn to tell him to be quiet and the person outside starts groaning. My dog instantly starts growling, a deep growl. I've never heard him do such a low growl until last night. The person starts saying, "Help." There's no urgency or pain. I ran into the bathroom and the man stops. I thought that I was hearing things and went back to the living room. Once I sat back down, the man started groaning again. I literally froze and couldn't move. My dog started growling again and his fur was standing up on end. That helped me to move again and we went into my bedroom. The man stopped again. I ran through who it could be in my head and I knew this man's voice wasn't familiar. I stepped into the living room again and the man loudly said, "Help!" I called the cops and explained what was going on. The cop asked if I could see anything out of my window and I said no. Then I was told that someone would be coming to check for me. The second I hung up, I heard, "Help," and more groaning. I ran into the hallway and watched a figure walk across the parking lot from my kitchen. My apartment is silent apart from the rain and my dog's breathing. I wait 20 minutes and go back into the living room. Then I hear the man say, "Help," again with more groaning. I called the cops again and 2 officers showed up. I stepped outside to talk as my dog was barking at them. As I was explaining the situation to one of the cops, I noticed a dry spot on the concrete. It looked like someone had been standing there for a long time. The officer even noticed and called the other cops over. They both looked around my building and told me to make sure my door stays locked. They also mentioned that the canvases covering my windows could be seen over if you were tall enough. Now tonight, 1 AM again. I was watching a movie and my dog was sleeping by the door. He starts doing the low growl again. I'm terrified and can't move. My dog jumps up and barks a few times. I'm even more scared now because of the noise my screen door made. It doesn't latch unless you pull it hard, and it hits the door frame twice if you don't latch it. It hit the door frame twice, and I know that I latched it earlier. I've been hearing tapping on my living room window, the same man's voice across the parking lot, and the screen door being messed with. I did get the guts to open my front door to the locked screen door, so no one can get in, but I'm still scared. This story takes place when I was in elementary school, back in the early 90s. I was 6 or 7, I can't really remember. Or rather, I try not to remember. I haven't told anyone of it since then, because he told me not to. I was in school on a crisp fall day, and the leaves had just started falling. The grassy green pigments I was used to had now turned into all different shades of yellow, brown and red. My friends and I always used to dive right into the leaves and we'd play hide and seek till the sun went down. I was super excited that day because the piles of leaves were massive, like mini autumn mountains. Those were some of my favourite memories from my early childhood. As soon as the clock struck 11:45, I anxiously awaited my teacher's approval to unlock the shackles keeping us in that confined classroom. And like the start of a horse race, we ran like bullets to our favourite time of the day. Recess. Unfortunately, our playground was confined at that point, as a girl named, what was her name again? Laurel. She was in my class the year prior, but I never really got to know her because she was always by herself. A lot of kids heard different stories about what happened to her. The night before was Halloween, so some kids said she wasn't missing, but instead was sick from eating too much candy. Others were convinced of her disappearance because of the tight-knit information being disclosed to us by the adults. But where'd she go? No one could quite agree on this part. The most popular theory was that she ran away, as she seemed to be a loner anyway. But none of these urban legends deterred us from playing our favourite game, Manhunt. For those of you who don't know, Manhunt is like the next level of hide and seek. There'd be 2 teams. One would have a given amount of time to find a good place to secure their location, while the other team would count down until the time was right for them to hunt us down. The goal was for the hiders to make it back to home base without getting caught. Everyone chipped in some Halloween candy into the winner's bowl. That day I made sure to be a runner. I knew the perfect place to hide. 3, 2, 1, go! Before I knew it, I was bolting through the battlefield. I ducked under swings and flew past teachers as I made my way to the edge of the pig pen I was fenced in by. But this particular fence had a secret. A hole. One big enough for a tiny kid like me to crawl into. No one would even think to look for me out in the woods behind the school. And when the time was right, bam! I'd be back at home base before anyone would realise they hadn't found me yet. I already tasted the sweet and sour candy in my watering mouth. I checked my left and right to see if anyone followed me, but I was in the clear. I dirtied up my white shorts as I dug my way out, like one of those army men training in the movies. Making it to the other side, I picked myself up and looked around for the perfect pile of leaves to disguise myself in. And there they were, right under a larger-than-life oak tree, one of the grandest heaps of leaves I had ever seen. I couldn't help but smile as I quietly made my way into the pile. I was afraid I'd somehow alert the seekers of my whereabouts if I crunched too much as I smuggled myself inside the cocoon. And there I lay, still smiling. I put my hands over my mouth to hold back from giggling. I had the kind of overwhelming joy a kid gets for the first time the tooth fairy visits them, or meeting Goofy at Disneyland. I was ecstatic. This feeling soon turned to disgust as I started noticing my surroundings. It smelt atrocious. I could only imagine hundreds of bugs, both living and dead, inside this home I'd made for myself. I wasn't too scared of bugs, but for some reason I felt utterly disgusted being in there. It felt moist and sticky and intoxicatingly gross. My eyes started itching. No, burning, as I viciously rubbed at them in a fruitless attempt to make the pain go away. The scent seemed to make its way into my lungs and started relentlessly stabbing at them. I couldn't take it anymore. I squirmed around in the nest trying to find my way out, but I could barely see through my fort as red became the primary colour shielding my vision. I didn't know whether my eyes were bleeding or if it was just the colour of the leaves rubbing against my face, but what I did know is that I wanted out of there, and I wanted it fast. Wiping my eyes against my dirt-stained shirt, my vision cleared and I saw another set of eyes staring back at mine. I squealed at first, thinking it was some sort of animal that was going to bite my face off, but then I realised it was just Laurel. I whispered to her, "Hey, Laurel, what are you doing in here? Everyone thinks you ran away from home." She kept staring at me but never gave me a response. "Are you hiding in here from someone too?" I asked anxiously. Come on, let's get out of here." I reached around for her hand and finally got hold of it. Her hand was small and gentle, yet chilly and once again sticky. Too many lollipops, I assured myself. I finally made my way into the refreshing sunlight and took in an enormous breath of air. I was still holding Laurel's hand, but something didn't feel quite right. She was a small girl, but she felt almost weightless. I slightly tugged at her arm, only to look back and see that it was just an arm. Before I could even let out a yelp, a large hand wrapped around my mouth. It was rough. I felt as if it was cutting my face with each slight movement. The hand was white as snow but was covered in filth that stood out due to the almost plastic colouring of the skin. I then heard a soft and relaxing whisper flow past my right ear. It was a man's voice, a voice that sang like a siren. "Shh, it's all right." My breathing became increasingly heavy and I knew he could tell. "Your friend and I were having a play date, but you can't tell anyone. It's our little secret." I finally managed to free my mouth from his grasp and let out a shriek of terror. I heard someone in the distance ask what that sound was. I knew they were coming to look, and he knew it too. "I have to go now," he told me. But you have to promise me that you won't tell anyone about me. Not your mum, not your dad, not anyone. And if you do," his final words seemed to linger for what felt like hours, "I'll know." And with that I heard his footsteps walk away, crunching through the leaves, making his way to the shelter of the dense woods. But he wasn't even running. His motions were so innocent. Even when a teacher and a couple of other kids found me, I knew he was still there, still watching, eyes wide open. I then became distracted by the blood-curdling howl of a scream the teacher let loose. One of the kids even threw up from the sight, the kind of sight no one should ever have to go through the horror of witnessing. Sirens and yelling from cops and parents flooded the schoolyard. Kids wondered what was going on as their mums and dads desperately picked them up, but the ones that were crying, they knew what happened. A burly police officer with a mustache too big for his lip approached me and tried getting any information he could. But it didn't matter how much they asked, because all they knew was that Laurel was found hacked and slashed in a pile of leaves outside the school after having disappeared the previous night. And that's all I knew. That's all I could tell them. Further questioning throughout the next few weeks wouldn't change anything. There was nothing else for me to say. He made sure of that. Every night I looked out my window, I saw him. His ghost-white skin haunted the darkness itself as he stood in my driveway. Most of the time he'd just be standing there, staring at my window. If we made eye contact, he would occasionally wave and sometimes put his index finger against his mouth, signalling for me to remain quiet. So every night I turned the other way to face the never-ending hallway outside of my room. The one lamp my mum made sure to always keep on out there illuminated his shadow against the wall. If I stared too long, his head would cock sideways like a dog hearing an unfamiliar noise. He was always there, watching over me like a demented angel. My secret admirer led to severe emotional stress that doctors pegged as PTSD from finding Laurel. Agony is the only way to describe the feeling I get when I wake up every morning, just trying to get my gears going to make it through another day. There was neither chemical twisting medication nor a four-eyed friendly shrink that could cure what I had. I got to an all-time low and hung a noose around my neck. But the pain wouldn't end. They just cut me down and stuck me here, in this goddamn mental institute, strapped down like a feral fucking animal. I know what you're feeling. Through my many years of social work, I've encountered so many lost souls that have been shattered from traumatizing events such as the one you went through, the soothing psychologist told me. It's hard to take in. But this man, he's all in my head, I guess. Having a staring contest with a dead girl can really spook a kid, huh? I chuckled with the slightest hesitation. I think you could use a nice long rest, he says with nurture. Yeah, I suppose some shut-eye would help. With that, Dr. Lotus gets up to shut the door. The sounds of beeping monitors and sussy nurses are slowly drowned out. All I can hear are the clinks and clanks of the doctor rummaging through a cedar cabinet. He calmly turns back to me holding some sort of gas mask. My body tingled with relief as he strapped the mask on around my head. As my eyes become heavy and I start drifting away, I see him pick up something. It's a scalpel. No, it's too sharp to be a scalpel. I told you not to tell anyone. I squirm in my chair, fighting against my inevitable nap. Shh. When I was 8 years old, I saw this humanoid-type creature in my room. I knew it was real because it knocked something in my room and it thought I was sleeping. I'm not sure what it did to me. I blacked out a few times, but it was real. I made myself bleed to know it wasn't a dream. One morning my things were knocked over and I had a bruise from where I'd hurt myself. I told my parents and my mother believed me because 50 years ago she saw the same thing with her brothers in their small hut-type home in village in Mexico where they lived by large fields of land. Ever since then weird things have happened and others who come to my house to sleep over have seen them too, even though I've never mentioned anything to anyone except my parents. Everyone believes me because they've seen these things. This is how it gets a little weird and quite unbelievable. Seeing these things brought out my curiosity, so I started training my intuition and mind more. I met 2 people online on a post I wrote about my experiences who have had similar occurrences. One in particular was very interested in what I'd seen, and he taught me how to channel my mind better to grow and learn. We grew my intuition gradually with cards and dice and coins for weeks, to the point where I could tell what number and symbol every card was. It scared me, but I kept with it. I trained myself in a pitch-black room to lose my senses in order to get more in tune with my mind. We practiced trying to read each other's thoughts, which is stupid, I know, but once we tried to practice, I tried to read his mind. He wrote down on a piece of paper what he would be thinking of, to show me after. What I saw was so different. He was in a yellow and white car driving on a summer's day and was so happy. He looked like he was singing to music. I also saw the image of a girl with brown hair, pale skin and brown eyes. Her name was Sarah. I started feeling her name louder inside me. It wasn't the sound of her name, but a feeling. Sarah. When I got out of the trance, he told me it was a memory that I had seen. The first time driving was with a yellow and white car, but that day he was trying to get into Sarah's mind to practice. I described her appearance. He showed me a photo of her and my heart sank because that was the girl in my head. We practiced more and things got intense because I practiced so much that with just a face in my mind, I started being able to access them alive. I could see what they were doing but not hear them. I practiced with a few other people without telling them. I saw a friend of mine. He was in his room getting up from a computer, pacing around his room looking energized, wearing a black shirt with a maroon rose on it. He grabbed his calendar off his wall and wrote on it. After this trance I called him asking what he was doing. He said he's feeling really hyper, so he got off his computer and just started writing what to do for the next week on his calendar. I asked what type of shirt he was wearing, and he said a black shirt. I asked if it had anything else on it, and he laughed, thinking I was being silly, but I insisted, and he said, yeah, a rose. I've seen people a few times and their current whereabouts, but it's scary. I started getting these weird trances where I saw my little niece severely sick, and she ended up getting a brain tumour. She had no symptoms except fevers. The worst was seeing my boyfriend covered in blood. The morning after this vision, I got a call from his sister saying he had been murdered. I saw a bus hit my best friend's brother and a kid from school behind the bus in his car. When it happened, we were there and I yelled for him not to cross the street. Then a second later, a bus came so fast and hit the same guy from school behind the bus. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't handle seeing these things, so I forced it out. When I can, my mind just pushes things away to the point that I can forget them, so I stopped. I started hearing voices threatening me. Once when I woke up, I saw a shadow coming out of my head and just vanish into the air. I never had sleep paralysis or anything, and I'd be able to move. It was just terrorizing. You don't have to believe me. It doesn't matter, but I'm just scared because during the last trance it told me through my senses that I'd be in danger, but I'd also be protected. That's the last time anything like that happened. I find myself writing this because lately the feeling of terror is back. People think these things are so interesting and cool, but in reality it's terrifying and traumatizing. I will continue to push these memories away and try and live my life normally, since it's been 7 years since the last time anything happened. I find myself writing this here because I don't want to tell anyone else, since it doesn't seem real. My family knows, but I'm scared to mention it again. It doesn't affect my everyday life at all. I live a boring life, but now it's scary to know what the mind is capable of. My life is pretty hectic. I'm now 16 and I was about 13 when I met my neighbours. Let's call the older one John and the younger one Mike. John was adopted and pretty nice when we first met. Mike wasn't adopted but still the youngest. I'm a homeschooled farm girl, so I didn't have many friends. Meeting them made me super happy and not feel so lonely. A bit of a backstory of when I began to notice how crazy John was. I had 3 dogs, raccoon dogs, hunting dogs, nice obedient dogs. John's dog was my dog's dad. Obviously, when he came over to my house, his dog came over as well. Our dogs fought a little, of course, because this strange dog was on my dog's territory. I never scolded his dogs, I mostly scolded mine, even if they weren't in the wrong. It was just one of those things you've got to be polite about, and me, wanting friends, tried to maintain our friendship. Well, it didn't work out well. John's dog attacked one of my dogs that was sleeping, and my dog, much stronger and younger, pinned his dog under him. John picked up a huge tree limb and slammed it down on top of my dog. I have no idea how he picked it up, but I instantly began yelling and screaming for him to never touch my dogs, or I'd do the same to him with a metal pole. Fast forward, I get a new puppy, a small hound dog. His name is Treasure. Treasure was super sweet to John and his dogs, but John was being a little bit off. He had been nailing frogs and rabbits to boards and had opened their stomachs like some experiment. I was a bit freaked out. Living in the country, my dogs normally go to the creek by themselves and then right back home when they're done playing. Treasure didn't follow Cujo, the dog that got hit by the limb, and the two others being Dustin and Raja. I went for a walk that day up my road and John met me halfway on my driveway, which was kind of weird. I asked him what was going on and what was up. Treasure was hit, he said. He hid his face with his hand, surely smiling because I saw his eyes light up. I ran to his house to see my dog laying on his side and barely breathing. Apparently he'd hit the dog with his four-wheeler, by accident. Whatever, you know. I cried my eyes out, but went ahead and forgave him even if it wasn't an accident. Fast forward 4 months later. My dog, Cujo, gets sick. He dies from poisoning. I tell John and he smiles slightly and says, "From what?" I told him it was from poisoning and that I didn't know how because he always stays either in our yard or by the creek, which is out of sight. Unless someone found him in the woods and had rat poison or some other stuff with them. John had a slight smile on his face. I accused him of doing the deed and obviously he refused and I didn't see him until maybe 7 months later. I had a new dog, Bear, and a new pup, Dodger. John and Mike had come over and John was on his four-wheeler and began to rev it. He swerved into Dodger and ran him over. Luckily he survived but has a scar on his leg. Then as they were leaving, because I was screaming at them, John tried to hit Bear and almost succeeded. This kid was 10 at the time. He's still my neighbour but he's actually a lot better now. I hope. I posted the other day about my paranormal experiences at a restaurant I used to work at a few years ago. It's Ham O'Shantner and it's one of the oldest restaurants in LA. The funny thing is most people, even from the city, have never heard of it, even though most people know its sister restaurant, Laurie's Steakhouse in Beverly Hills. Tam O'Shantner preceded Lowry's by several decades. Oh, and yes, if you're wondering if there is any relationship between that Lowry's and Lowry's Seasoning Salt that most Americans have come to know, there is. The same family that created Lowry's Seasoning Salt started their business with Tam O'Shantner. Because Tam O'Shantner was a favourite of the late Walt Disney, he would get many enthusiastic fans and tours. Yes, tours of the restaurant. I never knew Disney and Walt Disney fans existed until I started working there. In any event, as I stated in the previous post, I never thought so much about the paranormal. I mean, I'd had dreams and maybe what could be considered ESP episodes as a child, but never anything having to do with ghosts. I'd like to think I'm a pretty rational person. While I love a good ghost story, I've always thought most ghost stories can be explained, but after my time at Tam O'Shantner, I'm not so sure anymore. For a while I thought I was crazy, or perhaps it was a medication, but now I just don't know anymore. In my last post I talked about the whispers that plagued me almost immediately after I had started. They weren't really whispers, and it was always the same male and nondescript voice. Well, I wish I could say the voice was the only thing that happened to me, but it wasn't. One weekday morning I was scheduled to open for lunch. Arrival 10:30 a.m. It's not like the place is empty at that time. It's not. but there's only a fraction of the staff there at that time versus the dinner shift, and there's only one server on the floor. To create a mental picture, the Tam O'Shannon consists of front door entrance that spills into the pub. The pub looks and feels like an English pub, with tables and a few cosy booths for seating. If you walk further towards the back, you come to the main dining room with about 10 tables. Look to the left and there is a nook with about another 10 tables or so. That's the tartan room. If you look to your right, there is another room with about another 15 tables or so. If you walk further, you encounter a small service bar to your right, and then 6 or 7 steps leading up to a huge back dining room called the Prince Charlie Room. There's got to be at least another 20 tables there. The Prince Charlie Room was only open on weekends and holidays, and well, the whole month of December, as this was the busiest time for the restaurant. Now that I've laid out a picture, let me get back to the opening shift. My job as an opening server was to make roll-ups for the pub, which got quite chaotic and busy for about an hour for lunch each day. To make roll-ups you need silverware. Sometimes there wouldn't be any in the dish pit, and so I would raid the polished silverware in the Prince Charlie Room. That particular morning, it must have been my 3rd week at the Tam, and by then I knew if there wasn't any silverware in the dish pit I should go to the Prince Charlie Room. There was always something about that room that didn't quite feel right. It could be noon and 80 degrees, and yet that room still felt dark and cold. It didn't help that the only windows were at the back of the room. There were also these old paintings of some famous Scottish poets and young princesses that adorned the room. I don't know, but I always found them creepy, especially the picture of a young toddlerish boy. It didn't help that a few decades employees swore that they would see a young blonde toddler run across the room late at night. One employee, who had been there over 20 years, flat out refused to enter that room, regardless the time of day. He hadn't gone up in there in years. Well, that particular day I needed silverware. There was none, and I was new, and needed to make roll-ups. I had already been dealing with the voices, or the voice that continued to call out my name during service, but I had chalked that up to medication. So when I approached the Prince Charlie Room that morning, I didn't think much of it. I made it up the couple of steps just fine, but by the 3rd step it was like, I don't know, something was draining me. To this day I can't really describe it. It was like nothing I've ever experienced before or since. I got to the 4th stair and suddenly, it felt like my life force was being drained. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. It literally felt like someone or something was taking my energy, my being, everything away from me. I made it to the 5th stair but felt dizzy, tired, so tired, perhaps something like sunstroke. But I didn't just feel tired, I felt confused, like maybe I was having a stroke. I tried for the 2nd to last step but couldn't make it. I became disorientated, dizzy and exhausted by the same time. I felt like I was dying, or at least what I imagined dying must feel like. I immediately stopped and retreated down the stairs. I made it to a chair at a nearby table and sat down. Things were starting to spin and I was so tired. I think I sat there for about a minute. I had started a new medication a few weeks ago and told myself, it must be that. Yeah, I heard the voices for a couple of weeks now, but I too chalked that to the medication. I approached the stairs and this time I tried again, slowly. I made it up into the room. I hurriedly grabbed the silverware, looked around the creepy-looking and overall dark room, even in the daylight, and bolted down the steps again. I wish I could say this only happened once. It didn't. It's only been a few years, but my sense of time is a little messed up. I don't know if this second incident happened a few days later or a couple of weeks later, but I'm certain it happened in the first couple of months of working there. One afternoon after the above experience happened, I was working in the pub. I was still hearing voices, but there was always plenty of people around, so it never really scared me. Well, this particular afternoon I had just started my shift, and I was near the service well of the bar. If anyone doesn't know what a service well is, it's where the bartender makes the drinks for tables of a restaurant. The server then takes the drinks from the well and brings them to a table. That particular day, Narina was working in the service well. I can't remember, but I'm certain there was another server there as well. We were all chatting about something or other when all of a sudden I felt the same weakness, dizziness I had experienced that morning I had gone to the Prince Charlie Room for silverware. Again, I had never mentioned to anyone at this point about my experience on the steps, so when the feeling came over me, I ignored it. That is until Narina said something that shocked me. Out of nowhere, she blurted, "I feel dizzy all of a sudden." I can't remember if she said dizzy or weird, but I swear on my mother's dead grave she said something to that effect. Enough for it to elicit an adamant and eager, "Me too." No one knows how relieved I felt in that moment. For weeks I thought I was going crazy, losing my mind crazy. Hearing my name all the time, draining of my energy, I thought I was going batshit. The problem is, if you ask Narina about this incident, she has no recollection of it. She doesn't ever remember saying that, and she doesn't ever remember feeling dizzy, or like her energy was being drained, or like something really wrong was happening in that moment. By God though, I remember it. Clear as day. I remember being so happy that I wasn't the only person who felt that invisible force draining something away. But Narina doesn't remember this. She didn't remember this when I talked about it a few months later, and she doesn't remember it today. I often ask myself, what the fuck do I remember? I never had any paranormal experiences before I started working at good old Tam O'Shanter, and I was already in my 30s, so I didn't understand anything that was happening to me. For clarification, I still don't understand what, if anything, happened to me, but the worst part is that the voices and then the fainting energy spells wasn't the worst that would happen to me. I'll put that in the next post. Thanks for reading, and yes, once again, this story is 100% true.